They thought I would reschedule my wedding just because they chose to attend my sister's instead. After all, in our family, keeping up appearances always came before my happiness. But as I stood on the terrace of my $6 million villa in Tuscany, looking out over the vineyards without them, I realized something important. Their absence was not a punishment. It was my permission to finally stop playing the dutiful daughter and start settling the score. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 38 years old, and for most of my life, I have been the invisible pillar holding up a crumbling ceiling. Growing up in Colorado, our house was not a home, it was a stage set. My parents were the directors, obsessed with the performance of the white middle-class American dream. The lawns were manicured to within an inch of their lives, and our Sunday clothes were always starched stiff, regardless of the heat. We were the Hayes family, and according to my mother, we did not have problems. We had situations, and those situations were kept strictly behind closed doors where the neighbors could not see. Then there was Madeline, my sister. Madeline was 3 years younger and learned the script before she could even read. She was soft where I was sharp, compliant where I was inquisitive. She knew exactly how to tilt her head to make my father feel like the wisest man in the room, and she knew precisely which compliments would make my mother preen. She was the golden child, not because she was better, but because she was easier. She reflected their vanity back at them like a polished mirror. I, on the other hand, was the cracked glass that distorted the image. I asked too many questions. I wanted reasons for the rules. By the time I left for college, I realized that waiting for their approval was like waiting for rain in a drought, exhausting and futile. I stopped asking for help. I stopped asking for permission. Instead, I built a life that belonged solely to me. I clawed my way up the corporate ladder at Northridge Strategies, a private consulting firm where results mattered more than pedigree. I worked 80-hour weeks while Madeline floated through art history degrees funded by my father's retirement accounts. I bought my first apartment with money I had saved, dollar by dollar. While Madeline moved into a townhouse my parents helped her acquire because she was going through a transition. The distance between us grew not just in miles, but in values. Madeline viewed people as resources to be mined. I viewed relationships as structures to be built. We were strangers sharing a bloodline. Then came the engagement. I had been with Mark for 5 years. He was the first person who saw the exhaustion behind my independence. He did not want me to perform. He just wanted me to be. When he proposed, it felt like the first solid ground I had stood on in decades. For a woman who had spent 38 years fighting to prove she was worth space in a room, this ring was not just jewelry. It was validation. It was proof that I could be loved without condition. And foolishly, a small, dormant part of me began to hope. I thought a wedding would be the one thing that could bridge the gap. It is the universal language of families, isn't it? A wedding is a reset button. I convinced myself that my parents would finally look at me with the same teary-eyed pride they lavished on Madeline's minor achievements. I imagined my mother helping me choose flowers without criticizing my taste. I imagined my father walking me down the aisle, seeing me not as the difficult daughter, but as a woman who had made something of herself. I remember calling my mother to tell her the news. I held my breath, waiting for a caveat, a criticism, or a comparison to Madeline. "Oh, Eleanor," she had said, her voice unusually light. That is wonderful news." Finally. That single word finally stung, but I chose to ignore it. I clung to the wonderful. I let myself believe that this time, the playing field would be level. I was 38. I was successful. I was marrying a good man. Surely. This was enough to earn my place at the center of the photograph. I began planning with a naive enthusiasm I thought I had buried years ago. I did not know then that I was building a castle on a fault line. I did not know that in the Hayes family, there is only room for one protagonist, and the role had been cast long ago. The tea set on the coffee table was the same one my mother used for company she wanted to impress, not for family. That should have been my first warning. Mark sat beside me, his hand resting protectively on my knee, while my parents sat opposite us like a tribunal board. My mother smoothed her skirt, a nervous tic she had developed whenever she was about to rewrite history to suit her narrative. "Madeline has finally set a date," my mother said, her voice pitched a little too high. I smiled, though the tension in the room made my skin prickle. "That is great news." When August 12th, my father answered, his tone flat, as if he were reading a weather report. The air left my lungs. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. I looked from my father to my mother, waiting for the punchline. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady, "August 12th is my wedding day. You know this. The invitations went out 2 months ago." "We know, Eleanor." My mother sighed, waving a hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "But you know how difficult it is to book the Grandview estate. It was the only weekend available for the entire season. The waiting list is 2 years long, and the Parker family pulled strings to get Madeline in. So she took my date, I asked. She secured a venue." My father corrected me, leaning forward. "This is not just a party, Eleanor. This is a networking event. The guest list includes state senators and partners from the firm. It is crucial for the family reputation that this event goes perfectly." Mark shifted beside me, his grip on my knee tightening. "So you are asking Eleanor to cancel her wedding? After we have paid deposits, after family have booked flights, we are asking Eleanor to be the big sister," my mother snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Madeline needs us. She needs the support. You know how easily she gets overwhelmed. Eleanor, you are solid. You can handle a change of plans. Madeline cannot. It is just a few months." My father added, "Push it to November. We will cover the rescheduling fees, but we cannot be in 2 places at once, and we cannot miss Madeline's wedding. It would look like a snub to the Parkers." There it was, the naked truth. It was not about logistics. It was about value. Madeline's wedding was an investment. Mine was an inconvenience. "You are choosing," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "You are telling me that if I keep my date, you will not be there." "We are not choosing," my mother argued, her face flushing pink. "We are prioritizing. We are getting old. Eleanor, we cannot handle the stress of split loyalties. Why must you always make this so difficult? Why can't you just understand?" "I understand perfectly," Mark said, his voice cold. I put a hand on Mark's arm to silence him. I looked at the people who had raised me. I saw the expectation in their eyes, the certainty that I would fold, just as I had when I gave up the big bedroom for Madeline, just as I had when I stayed home to care for Grandma so Madeline could go to prom. "No," I said. My mother blinked. "Excuse me." I said no. I repeated, and for the first time in my life, the word did not feel like a failure. It felt like a shield. I am not moving my date. I am getting married on August 12th. If you choose to be at the Grandview estate instead of with your daughter, that is your choice. But do not pretend I forced you to make it. You are being incredibly selfish. My father spat, standing up. Think about what the relatives will say. I am done thinking about what people say, I replied, standing up to meet his gaze. I am thinking about what I deserve. I walked out of that house with my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I did not look back. I knew that the moment I closed that front door, I was not just leaving a house. I was leaving the fantasy that I ever really had a family to begin with. For the first 48 hours after walking out of my parents' house, I felt like a phantom limb was throbbing. It was a strange sensation to realize that the people who were supposed to be my foundation were actually the anchor dragging me down. I sat in my home office, the glow of the monitors illuminating the dark room, and asked myself a question I had avoided for decades. If I am not the dutiful daughter, who am I? I pulled up my accounts. I needed to see it in black and white. I needed to see the numbers that proved I existed outside of the Hayes family narrative. There it was, my portfolio, my savings, my equity in Northridge Strategies. Every cent earned through sleepless nights and strategic negotiations. I did not owe them a penny. I did not owe them my success. And then, I clicked on a folder I had named Project V. 3 years ago, I had done something impulsive. Well, impulsive for me. I had purchased a dilapidated estate in Tuscany. It was a wreck of stone and overgrown vines, but it sat on a hill that looked like it touched the sky. I had poured money into it, hiring local artisans to restore it beam by beam. I never told my parents. I barely told Madeline. It was my secret garden, my escape hatch. I had bought it because, deep down, I think I always knew this day would come. I knew a day would arrive when I would need a place where the air did not taste like judgment. I looked at the photos of the finished terrace, the way the Tuscan sun hit the ancient stone. "Mark," I called out. He appeared in the doorway, a mug of coffee in his hand. "Yeah, we are keeping the date," I said. "But we are changing the venue." He looked at the screen, then at me. "Italy, Italy. The villa is ready. If they want a wedding that is all about appearances, let them have the Grandview estate. We are going to have a marriage." The decision settled over me like a warm blanket. I did not send a formal announcement to my parents. I did not send a long, tear-stained letter explaining my pain. I simply stopped engaging. My phone began to ring the next day. Mom, Dad, Madeline. I watched the screen light up and then go dark, over and over again. When the voicemails started piling up, I deleted them without listening. "Eleanor, pick up. We need to coordinate the press release for Madeline." My mother's voice transcribed on the screen before I swiped it away. "You are being childish." "Call us back," my father texted. They were furious. I could feel their rage radiating through the digital silence. They were used to me arguing, explaining, and eventually capitulating. They were prepared for a fight, but they were not prepared for a ghost. My silence was a mirror, and they hated what they saw in it. For the first time in 38 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of their expectations. I felt light. I realized that by refusing to play their game, I had already won. I was not their daughter anymore. I was a woman with a plan, a passport, and a $6 million fortress that they could not touch. Tuscany did not just welcome me, it absorbed me. The air here was different, heavy with the scent of sun-baked earth, wild rosemary, and ancient stone that had stood firm through centuries of storms. As the car wound its way up the cypress-lined driveway, the villa finally came into view. It was a sprawling structure of honey-colored stone and terracotta, perched on a hill that overlooked a valley of olive groves and vineyards stretching as far as the eye could see. I had spent $6 million on this property. To my parents, that number would have been a headline, a figure to drop casually at a cocktail party to prove their relevance. But to me, it was not a status symbol. It was a fortress. Every stone, every archway, every heavy wooden door represented a boundary I had set with the world. It was the physical manifestation of my autonomy, standing on the terrace, feeling the warmth of the Italian sun on my face. I realized that for the first time in my life, I was standing on ground that no one could pull out from under me. The wedding itself was small. We had invited only 30 people. There were no state senators, no partners from the law firm, no distant cousins who only called when they needed money. There were just the people who knew the real Eleanor, my college roommate who had held my hair back when I had food poisoning, my mentor from Northridge who had taught me how to negotiate without apologizing, and Mark's brother who had helped us move into our first apartment in exchange for pizza. As we gathered for the rehearsal dinner in the courtyard, I watched them. I watched the way they laughed with their heads thrown back, the way they passed bottles of wine without pretense. There was no stiff posturing. No one was scanning the room to see if there was someone more important to talk to. This place is unreal, Elle, my best friend Sarah said, walking up to me with a glass of Prosecco. But you know what is better? You look light. I feel light, I admitted, clinking my glass against hers. It was in that moment of peace that the ghost of my other life tried to intrude. My phone buzzed on the stone table. I should have ignored it. But habit is a muscle that takes time to atrophy. I glanced at the screen. It was an email from my mother. The subject line was blank. I opened it. You have embarrassed us beyond words. The Parkers are asking where you are. We had to lie and say you were ill. You are selfish and cruel to ruin your sister's moment like this. Do not expect us to forgive this easily. I stared at the words. A month ago, that message would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and frantic phone calls. I would have tried to fix it. I would have apologized for existing inconveniently. But standing there, surrounded by the golden light of Tuscany and the people who actually loved me, the words felt toothless. They were just pixels on a screen. Everything okay? Mark asked, stepping up beside me, his hand finding the small of my back. I looked at him, then down at the phone. I did not type a reply. I did not try to explain. I simply pressed the power button and slid the phone into my pocket. Everything is perfect, I said, and I meant it. The ceremony took place at 4 o'clock the next afternoon, under the shade of a massive oak tree that was older than my entire country. I walked down the aisle alone. I had thought that walking without my father would feel like a deficit, a hole in the picture, but as my shoes crunched on the gravel path, I felt a surge of power. I was giving myself away. I was coming to this marriage whole, not as a piece of property being transferred from one man to another. When I reached Mark, his eyes were wet. He took my hands, his grip solid and warm. I promise, he said, his voice cracking slightly, to be the family you choose, and the family that chooses you back, every single day. I promise, I replied, my voice steady and clear, ringing out in the silent afternoon air. To honor myself as much as I honor you, I promise to never shrink to fit into a room again. As we kissed, the applause from our 30 guests felt louder than a stadium. It was genuine. It was fierce. I looked out at the rolling hills, the golden light turning to purple twilight, and I felt a strange, vibrating tension deep in my chest. It was not fear. It was the adrenaline of a soldier who has just won the first battle of a long war. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that my parents were about to try and cross it. But this time, I was ready. The bliss of Tuscany lasted exactly 48 hours after the vows. We were sitting on the terrace, drinking espresso, when I decided to check my primary investment portal. It was a habit, a reflex from years of managing risk at Northridge Strategies. I logged in, expecting to see the usual fluctuations of the market. Access denied. Account frozen. I blinked. I refreshed the page, assuming it was a glitch in the Italian internet connection. Access denied. Please contact the administrator. My stomach dropped. I immediately called my personal attorney back in Denver. David. It was 3 a.m. there, but I did not care. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice groggy and thick with sleep. Eleanor. Is everything okay? My accounts are locked. David, I said, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The Vanguard portfolio, the high-yield savings, all of it. What is going on? There was a pause, the sound of typing, and then a sharp intake of breath on the other end. I was going to call you in the morning, David said, his tone shifting from sleepy to professional alert. I just got the notification an hour ago. There was a transfer request authorized yesterday, a massive liquidation. I did not authorize anything. I snapped. I am in Italy. I know you didn't, David said softly. Your father did. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My father, he doesn't have access. I removed him from the joint accounts 10 years ago. He didn't use a joint account login, David explained. He used the durable power of attorney document you signed when you were 22, the one from when you went backpacking in Southeast Asia. You never revoked it. Eleanor, I felt sick. I remembered that document. I was young, terrified of something happening to me overseas, and I had trusted them. I had signed a piece of paper giving them total control over my finances in case of an emergency. What emergency? I whispered. I am not in a coma. I am on my honeymoon. According to the filing attached to the transfer, the emergency is listed as family insolvency prevention. David read, Eleanor, they transferred $1.2 million. To where? To a corporate account registered to Prestige Holdings. That is Madeline's husband's real estate firm. Isn't it? I closed my eyes. The pieces clicked together with a sickening precision. Madeline's husband, Greg, had been bragging about a new development deal for months, but I had heard rumors that he was leveraged to the hilt. He was drowning in debt, and my parents had decided that my hard-earned money was the life raft. They stole from me, I said, my voice flat. They will argue it was a loan, David warned. They will argue that as your power of attorney, they made a fiduciary decision to protect family assets. It is legally gray, Eleanor. It is a mess. I hung up the phone. I sat there, staring at the beautiful Tuscan valley, but I saw none of it. I saw my father's signature on a withdrawal slip. I saw my mother nodding, justifying it to herself. Eleanor has so much, she would say. Eleanor is strong. Madeline needs help. It is just money. Family helps family. It was not just about the wedding. The wedding snub was just the surface, a distraction to keep me hurt while they moved the pawns. They knew I would be angry about the date, so they used that conflict to mask the real operation. While I was fighting for my dignity, they were robbing my vault. They viewed me not as a person, but as a bank account with a pulse. They believed they had the right to harvest my success to feed Madeline's failures because, in their twisted logic, my success belonged to the Hayes family brand. Mark touched my shoulder. You're shaking. I looked at him. The tears I expected did not come. Instead, a cold, metallic calm washed over me. It was the same feeling I got before a hostile takeover meeting. The hurt was gone. The shock was gone. What remained was clarity. They think I will come home and scream. I told Mark, my voice dropping to a register he had never heard before. They think I will sue them and they can guilt me into dropping it because family is everything. They think this is a dispute. I stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. I looked at the $6 million view I had bought with money they hadn't managed to touch yet. This isn't a dispute, I said. This is war. My father thought he was playing chess, but he did not realize he was playing on a board I had designed 5 years ago. He assumed that the durable power of attorney was the master key to my kingdom. He was wrong. It was a tripwire. I sat in the library of the villa, the air conditioning humming a low, steady note that matched my pulse. I was not calling the police. That would be too messy and too public. Instead, I opened a secure server connected to my assets in Zurich and London, years ago, when Northridge Strategies began handling high-risk corporate restructuring. I learned a valuable lesson: always segregate your risk. I had set up a blind trust structure for my European assets. It had a very specific clause known as a cross-default trigger. Basically, if my American liquidity dropped below a certain percentage without my biometric authorization, the European trusts interpreted it as a hostile event. It automatically froze all linked collateral. And the kicker was that my parents had used my American portfolio as proof of funds to secure loans for their own retirement properties years ago. They had forgotten that detail. I had not. I typed in my authorization code. The screen flashed green. The counterstrike began. Within 3 hours, the automated legal bots in London sent out a barrage of notices. They did not just target the bank accounts, they targeted the liability. The $1.2 million my father had siphoned off was flagged as disputed funds by the international banking system. My phone rang at 6 in the evening. It was my father. "Eleanor," he barked, his voice tight. "What the hell is going on?" "The bank just called. They froze the transfer to Greg's company. They are saying the funds are. They are saying they are illicit." "They are illicit," I replied, taking a sip of sparkling water. "You stole them." "I was authorized," he shouted. "I have the paper. You have a piece of paper that grants you authority to act in my best interest," I said, my voice cool and detached. "Draining my liquidity to bail out a failing real estate firm run by your son-in-law does not meet the legal definition of my best interest. My trustees in Zurich agree. They have flagged the transaction as potential elder financial abuse and embezzlement. Since you are the signatory, the investigation starts with you." "Investigation." His voice cracked. "Eleanor, you cannot be serious. This will ruin Greg. He needs that money by Friday to cover payroll. If he defaults, that is a business problem." I cut in. "If you go to jail for wire fraud, that is a personal problem." I could hear frantic whispering in the background, and then Madeline's voice pierced the air. She sounded hysterical. "You are doing this on purpose," she screamed into the speakerphone. "You are trying to destroy my life because you are jealous Greg is going to lose the investors. They are asking for audits now." "Eleanor, they want to see where the money came from." I smiled. That was the piece of information I had been waiting for. "Audits," I asked softly. "Why would an investor audit a company just because a transfer was delayed?" "Unless, of course." Greg has been cooking the books, and the sudden freeze exposed a gap in the ledger. Silence. Heavy, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. "Madeline," I said, "did Greg tell you the business was just having a cash flow problem, or is he running a Ponzi scheme?" He said it was temporary." Madeline stammered, her voice losing its edge and replaced by pure fear. "He said he just needed to bridge the gap until the next round of funding." "There is no next round," I told her. "I looked at his public filings an hour ago. He is insolvent. Mom and Dad just threw $1.2 million into a black hole. And now that I have flagged it, the IRS is going to want to know why my parents are moving seven-figure sums into a bankrupt entity. You have to stop it." My mother's voice joined the chorus, trembling. "Eleanor, please. The bank is freezing our personal accounts too because they are linked as guarantors. We cannot access our pension. I cannot stop it." I lied. The European compliance team takes financial irregularities very seriously. Once the red flag goes up, it stays up until the origin of the funds is verified. You have to explain to them why you took my money, and you have to do it on the record. "We are your parents," my father whispered, the fight draining out of him. "Then you should have acted like it," I said. "You wanted to control my assets. Congratulations. Now you have to answer for them." I hung up the phone. The power dynamic had shifted so violently I could almost feel the wind. They thought they were disciplining a rebellious child. They had no idea they had just handed the prosecutor the murder weapon. It took 3 months for me to agree to a meeting. I stipulated the terms neutral ground was impossible given the legal sensitivity. So I agreed to come to their house, but only for 1 hour. When I walked into the living room, the air smelled of lemon polish and desperation. My parents were sitting on the beige sofa, their posture stiff, like children waiting outside a principal's office. Madeline was curled up in the armchair, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. I did not sit down. I placed a thick black binder on the coffee table. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed in the silent room. "Eleanor, please, sit," my mother said, gesturing to the empty spot beside her. Her voice was thin, brittle. We want to fix this." The neighbors are starting to ask why you haven't visited since the summer. The neighbors, I repeated, my tone devoid of inflection. That is your concern, not the wire fraud, not the embezzlement, the neighbors. It was not fraud. My father grumbled, though he could not meet my eyes. It was a family allocation. We intended to pay it back. Greg just had a liquidity issue. We were going to replace the funds before you even noticed. But I did notice, I said, and so did the federal regulators. I opened the binder. Inside were the forensic accounting reports my team had compiled over the last 90 days. I turned the notebook around so they could see the charts. The lines were red and jagged. You ruined him, Madeline whispered, her voice trembling. She looked up at me, her eyes rimmed with red. Greg's company is under audit. The investors pulled out. We might lose the house. Eleanor, how could you do that to your own sister? I looked at Madeline. For 38 years, her tears had been currency. They purchased my parents' sympathy, their resources, and my compliance. But today, the currency had no value. I did not ruin Greg, I said calmly. Greg has been insolvent for 2 years. Look at page 4. I pointed to the document. He has been using new investor capital to pay off old loans since 22. I explained, speaking as if I were in a boardroom. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. The $1.2 million Mom and Dad stole from me was not going to save the business. Madeline. It was going to buy him maybe 3 more months of pretending. I didn't sink the ship. I just refused to patch the hole with my own skin. We didn't know. My mother gasped, her hand covering her mouth. He told us it was a bridge loan for a new development. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, I countered. Just like you didn't want to know how it felt when you told me my wedding didn't matter. You operate on what looks good, not what is true. Greg looked successful, so you gave him my money. I looked independent, so you assumed I wouldn't mind being robbed. We are family, my father shouted, slamming his hand on the armrest. It was a ghost of his old authority, a flare trying to spark in a vacuum. You don't treat family like a business transaction. You are right, I said, closing the binder. You don't. In a business transaction, there are contracts and mutual respect. In this family, there is only predation. You took my loyalty and used it to sign checks I didn't authorize. You took my love and used it as leverage to make me accept being second best. The room fell silent. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. I saw the realization dawn on them, slow and painful. They were waiting for me to crack. They were waiting for me to scream, to cry, to demand an apology so they could withhold it and regain control. But I was not offering them any emotion to feed on. I thought you would understand, Madeline sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I'm scared. Elle, I don't know what to do. You are 35 years old. Madeline, I said, you figure it out. That is what adults do. We face the consequences of our choices. I checked my watch. I have 10 minutes left. Here is the reality. The European Trust has agreed to lift the freeze on your personal pension accounts. Dad, on one condition, you sign a confession of judgment acknowledging the debt to me. You will repay the principal plus interest over the next 10 years. And if I refuse, my father asked, his face gray. Then the forensic report on page 4 goes to the district attorney. I replied. And since you signed the transfer order, you become an accomplice to Greg's fraud. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. They looked at each other. They looked at the house they had spent 40 years polishing for the neighbors. They looked at Madeline, who was useless to them now. And finally, they looked at me. They realized that the daughter who used to seek their approval was dead. In her place stood a creditor, and creditors do not care about excuses. The check sat on the polished mahogany coffee table between us, a flimsy piece of paper trying to cover a canyon of betrayal. My father had slid it across the surface with a trembling hand, his eyes darting to the window as if he expected the police to burst through the drapes at any moment. $500,000, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is all we can liquidate without triggering tax penalties. Take it, Eleanor. Take it and sign a waiver stating this was a misunderstanding. We can work out a payment plan for the rest over the next 5 years. I looked at the check. $500,000. It was a significant amount of money to anyone else, but to me, in this moment, it was an insult. It was less than half of what they had stolen. More importantly, it was a bribe. You want me to lie, I said, not touching the paper. You want me to tell the federal regulators that I authorized a transfer to a bankrupt company so you can save face at the country club. We are trying to protect the family name, my mother hissed, leaning forward. Her face was pale, her makeup settling into the deep lines of stress around her mouth. If this goes to court, Eleanor, it will be in the papers. The Denver Post will run it. Do you have any idea what that will do to us? To your father's legacy? I sat back, a cold realization settling in my chest. Even now, facing financial ruin and potential criminal charges, their primary emotion was not remorse. It was not guilt for stealing from the daughter who had never asked them for anything. It was vanity. They were terrified of the neighbors finding out that the perfect Hayes family was a fraud. I do not care about Dad's legacy, I said, my voice steady. Because his legacy is built on my money. Eleanor. Please, Madeline whimpered from the armchair. She looked ravaged, her usual immaculate grooming gone. Just take the deal. Greg is falling apart. If the investigation continues, he could go to prison. I looked at my sister. Even now, she was asking me to set myself on fire to keep her warm. No, I said. My father's head snapped up. What did you say? I said no. I repeated, I am not accepting a partial payment, and I am certainly not signing a waiver. You committed fraud. You do not get to negotiate the consequences. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen once. It was a signal I had arranged with David earlier that morning. Since you are refusing to confess judgment, I told them, standing up, I have just instructed my legal team to activate the acceleration clause in the indemnification agreement you signed. What are you talking about? My father demanded, standing up to face me. The power of attorney document had a collateral clause, I explained, enjoying the look of confusion on his face. It states that if the agent that is you, Dad misuses the principal's funds, the principal has an immediate lien on the agent's personal assets to recover the debt. I just filed a Ellis pendens on this house, and on the cabin in Aspen. My mother let out a strangled scream. You put a lien on our house. I froze it. I corrected her. You cannot sell it. You cannot refinance it. And since you do not have the cash to pay me back, in 30 days, the sheriff will begin foreclosure proceedings to satisfy the debt. You cannot do that, my father shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. This is our home. We have lived here for 40 years and I worked for 15 years to earn the money you stole. I shot back. You made a choice. Now you are living in it. Madeline suddenly stood up, her eyes wide with panic. Wait, if the house is frozen, how are we going to pay Greg's defense attorney, Dad? You said you would take out a second mortgage to pay the retainer. The room went deadly silent. My father froze. He did not look at Madeline. He looked at the floor. We cannot mortgage the house now. Madeline, he muttered. She locked it down. But you promised, Madeline screamed, her voice cracking. You told me to stay calm because you had the equity. You told me I was the priority. Shut up, Madeline, my father roared, spinning on her. Can't you see the house is gone? We are losing everything. I can't worry about Greg right now. Madeline recoiled as if he had struck her. She took a step back, her hand flying to her chest. I watched the realization crash over her. For her entire life, she believed she was the beloved princess, the one they cherished. But in that moment, she saw the truth. She was just another accessory to their image, and now that the ship was sinking, they were throwing her overboard to try and save the furniture. I am just a bill to you, Madeline whispered, tears streaming down her face. You don't care about Greg. You don't care about me. You just care about the house. Welcome to the real world. Madeline, I said, my voice low. They don't love us. They love the reflection we give them. And the mirror just broke. I walked toward the door. My mother rushed after me, grabbing my arm. Her grip was desperate, her nails digging into my skin. Eleanor, stop, she begged. The notices. Will they be public? Will the sheriff put a sign on the lawn? I looked down at her hand until she let go. Yes, I said. Tomorrow morning. Bright orange. Foreclosure pending. Everyone driving by will see it. The Parkers, the neighbors, everyone. You are a monster, she spat, her eyes filled with hate. No, Mother, I said, opening the door and stepping out into the cool evening air. I am just the bill collector, and your account is overdue. I returned to Tuscany in late October. The vineyards were turning gold and russet, shedding their leaves just as I was shedding the last heavy layers of my past. This time, walking through the heavy oak doors of the villa did not feel like checking into a hotel or hiding in a bunker. It felt like coming home. I was not running away from the wreckage in Denver. I was simply choosing not to stand in the debris while it burned. I sat at the antique desk in the study, a single sheet of heavy cream stationery before me. I needed to send one last thing, not a subpoena, not a foreclosure notice, a letter. For weeks, I had composed angry screeds in my head, listing every slight, every birthday forgotten, every time they looked past me to praise Madeline's mediocrity. But looking at the blank page, I realized I had no energy left for anger. Anger requires attachment, and I was severing the cord. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. Dear Mom, Dad, and Madeline, I am not writing this to ask for the money back. The courts will handle that. I am writing to tell you that the debt is settled. Not the financial one, but the emotional one. For 38 years, I thought love was a transaction. I thought if I achieved enough, earned enough, and gave enough, I would buy my way into your hearts. I realize now that I was trying to buy something you do not have to sell. I am releasing you. I am releasing the need for you to be proud of me. I am releasing the anger I felt when you chose Madeline. I am letting you go, not because I forgive you, but because I do not have the space in my life for people who only love me when it is convenient. Do not contact me. Let the lawyers do their jobs. Eleanor. I sealed the envelope. I did not feel the urge to cry. I felt a strange, hollow lightness, like a room that has finally been cleared of old, broken furniture. I walked out to the terrace where Mark was reading. He looked up, shielding his eyes from the autumn sun. We did not have the frantic, breathless romance of teenagers. We had something better. We had the quiet, sturdy understanding of two adults who had seen the ugly parts of life and chosen to stay anyway. He knew exactly what the letter said, and he knew he did not need to read it. Did you send it? He asked. I sealed it, I said, taking a seat beside him. It feels finished. It is finished, Mark replied, reaching out to squeeze my hand. I looked out at the valley. I had lost a lot. I had lost the parents I thought I had. I had lost the sister I tried to protect. I had lost over $1 million in liquid cash that I might never fully recover, even with the foreclosure. But as I sat there, breathing in the scent of cypress and rain, I realized it was a fair trade. I had paid a high price for my freedom, but freedom is never cheap. I finally understood the difference between blood and family. Blood is just biology. It is a genetic accident. Family is respect. Family is the people who stand beside you when the checks stop clearing and the status disappears. My parents and Madeline shared my DNA, but they were strangers who had overstayed their welcome. I no longer needed them to tell me I was a good daughter. I no longer needed their permission to be happy. The validation I had craved for decades had been a trap, keeping me small, keeping me tethered to their dysfunction. Now, the rope was cut. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Back in Colorado, the orange foreclosure notices were likely being stapled to the front door of my childhood home. The neighbors were likely whispering. My mother was likely weeping into the phone to anyone who would listen, spinning a story where she was the victim. But here, in the life I had built with my own hands, there was only silence. It was the most expensive silence I had ever bought, and it was worth every single penny. The gavel did not make a loud bang like they show in the movies. It was just a dull thud that echoed in the mostly empty courtroom, signaling the end of the war. The judge ruled in my favor. The lien on my parents' estate was upheld, and the foreclosure was authorized to satisfy the debt of $1.2 million plus legal fees. I was not there to see their faces when the sheriff finally evicted them. I heard from David that it was ugly. My mother apparently refused to leave the master bedroom until the deputies threatened to carry her out. My father stood on the lawn, yelling at the neighbors to stop staring, trying to command respect from a sidewalk that he no longer owned. They lost the house. They lost the cabin in Aspen, but more importantly, they lost the one thing they valued above all else, their reputation. The news of the foreclosure and the fraud investigation into Madeline's husband spread through their social circle like wildfire. The perfect Hayes family was exposed as a hollow shell, rotting from the inside out. Greg is currently awaiting trial for wire fraud, and Madeline, the golden child who had never worked a day in her life, is now working as a receptionist at a dental office to pay rent on a 2-bedroom apartment she shares with our parents. I did not send flowers. I did not send a card saying, "I told you so." I simply maintained the silence. There was no tearful reunion. There was no movie moment where they realized the error of their ways and begged for my forgiveness. They still blame me. I know this because David forwards me the blocked emails where they call me ungrateful, cold, and cruel. They tell themselves that I am the villain who stole their twilight years. They will never understand that I did not take anything from them that they had not already forfeited the moment they signed my name to a bank transfer. Standing on the terrace of my villa in Tuscany, watching the sun dip behind the rolling hills, I realized that I did not feel triumphant. Victory implies a battle where someone wins and someone loses. This did not feel like winning. It felt like waking up from a long, feverish nightmare. I took a sip of wine, the liquid cool and sharp on my tongue. Mark was inside, cooking dinner, the sound of jazz drifting out through the open doors. I looked at the deed to the villa, sitting on the table. It was mine. My life was mine. My future was mine. I used to think revenge meant making the other person suffer. I used to fantasize about screaming at them, about making them feel the smallness they forced on me for 38 years. But looking at the peace around me, I understood the truth. True revenge is not about noise. It is not about destruction. True revenge is simply removing your access to me. It is closing the door and locking it, leaving them outside with the consequences of their own actions while I stay inside, warm and safe. The justice I got was not just about the money. It was about the boundary. I had finally drawn a line that they could not cross. They could scream, they could cry, and they could blame the world, but they could never again reach into my life and take what was not theirs. I turned my back on the view and walked inside to my husband. The air was clear, the debt was paid, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Eleanor's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Mira Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.